So I have way too many variations of this general design. Huh. That adapter tank did not look like that before. I swear it did not, but it doesn't have any variants. That is definitely different. In any case, I have many variations on this design that I went through the process of trying to make a 5-meter wide cargo plane. As you can see, it's all empty in there, using these structural tube pieces. And this was the first variant, which I believe, I don't remember if it actually has the robotic system hooked up hidden in here. Oh yes, it does. So I had first attempted to make, you know, a tail that lifts up, right? Problem is, especially with having the control surfaces on here, and this is just not strong enough to hold it in place. And so I went to the next variation. Actually, before I even got to that, I needed to figure out where to put the engines on it, as well as where I was going to store fuel, because there is no fuel in any of this fuselage, and especially not here, because the fuselage, if there's... Hey, look! See, it's a different variation. The texture is different, but there's... What? That doesn't make any sense. I don't remember why that's there. I may have been thinking about putting a... Yes, putting a hinge on the front as well. Let's see. Is this actually... Okay, it's locked. So I'm guessing it's not able to be used, but did I actually... Oh, look at that! Even at this version, I was thinking about, well, if I can't lift the tail, maybe I can lift the front. Unfortunately, it's still too heavy for a single hinge to lift, even though that's the biggest hinge there is. But like I said, there is no fuel in here, and with the how heavy this cockpit is, I couldn't store any fuel up there because it would throw the center of mass way up to the front. In the third variation, I got some wings on it, and I believe this is the one where I finally tried to fly it. The fourth iteration, very minor difference. You might notice there's a clipped winglet right here in the cockpit, all the way up, a basic fin, excuse me, because I was trying to get these to line up a bit better. Unfortunately, they are not super close. At this point, I'm doing minor adjustments to the overall design, so no visible difference. And you can see here that I redid the whole tail to try to have a hinge hidden under another nose cone, of course, to just lift this back section. And I also arranged it so that we have an extremely high degree of ability to move, and it basically goes just to where it almost would touch the tail. But unfortunately, that nose cap, or that end cap, is still too heavy for the hinge, and I'm not good at doing multi-hinge designs yet, or piston-based designs with hinges and whatnot. It's something that I do want to try at some point, but unfortunately was beyond my capabilities at this time. And finally, this isn't finally, but this is one of the last versions. Let's go ahead and... Are you gonna... Yeah, let's get you on the runway. Okay. Little bouncy on load. And I don't remember if I set this to a particular action group. Ah, yes, action group 2. As you can see, opens those from its normal closed position to this. Which, I mean, oh yeah, and these also open. Which I just think is a really neat way to do that, because it's like, oh yeah, that's completely sealed. I mean, not really, but it's pretty close, and then pretty open. But unfortunately, this doesn't really give you a lot of access to put something in there, and you'd need some sort of crane or lift, or maybe, you know, maybe you could get away with just detracting the landing gear, although apparently that also just folded it in, so that doesn't really work either, unfortunately. Yeah, as you can see, I can't fold it back out unless I put the landing gear back out. It doesn't stay out there. Although it looks like we're also running into some power issues, which, to be fair, exists because I haven't, what's the word I'm looking for? I hadn't fully finished the design yet. I was going to address power after I get a design that allows me to actually load something in. And the last variant was actually just a modification in the center of mass on this to make it fly a little better. Unfortunately, none of these really flew better, and I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board on this concept at another time. While we're here, I'm going to show you some failed variations of my refueler plane. So as you can see, this has a couple of passenger cabins, but one of them has been replaced with a liquid fuel tank with very little liquid fuel in it. This is trying to keep the same aspect ratio as the original passenger plane. There's also a cargo plane variant of this. This, like I said, is one of the failed versions of this. I don't remember what action I had to deploy this, I believe I had, yes, toggle boom. I had a little segment here, a little robot control that is supposed to, oh, that's not gonna, okay. I thought I could go ahead and play it there, but I couldn't. So, oh my, why will you not play? Well, in any case, it's supposed to bring it out the back like this, which works fairly decently. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of range of motion that this has, and it's also pretty close to the back of the plane where you're going to have to be driving something else potentially in a spot where it could be hit by the airflow from the engines, and generally it's just not that secure design. I do very much like the look of the boom, but it wasn't that useful, and I felt like it would not work well. This variation was attempting to do something a little bit like what the C-130 does when it's used for refueling. These are all dead parts hooked up in a way to make them like a rope ladder, essentially, attached to a piston on the very top that will allow them to extend all the way out. Oh yes, I can't look at the exact things because this is unmotorized. Unfortunately, the problem with this is that due to the physics in this game, these kind of just flail around. They don't really simulate a rope well enough. They just go in circles, and it makes this docking port be in a position that's going to be pretty much impossible to connect to. So we do not want to do it this way either. Now this variation is very similar to what I ended up going with at the very end. There is, I believe, a controller on this. Oh no, there's not. It is just an action group. Really? Huh. Toggle ramp, toggle piston, toggle motor engaged, and toggle piston. Ah, yes. Okay, so the way this works and the way it's simpler, so this is just a piston, and so it will just straight on go on. So that gives you some distance down beneath the plane. Okay. Then there's another piston here, which will also just go all the way out. So that's pretty good, except, you know, obviously that's pointing up at an angle. There are two little motor bits here to give a little freedom on the end to move, and then the other joint here has a little bit of freedom to move side to side. This, the motor is toggled. It has a set angle that it wants to be at, but we turn the motor off, which will allow it to drop down and be basically in flight around here is where it ends up, and this ends up, the tail bit ends up a little closer to level, but still angled down slightly, and it does go back and forth to the sides a little bit, but overall makes a target that should be much easier to get to, and it's also further below the plane, hopefully out of the range of the exhaust screwing things up. I have not tested this in flight yet, but I plan to at another time. While we're here, I was attempting to make an Osprey, and it did not go very well. I am not good with the helicopter parts at all. There's actually a plane that I have in here, or rather a helicopter, that does a really, really good job of showing how to use these effectively, but even so, I've still not figured it out myself. There's also a shuttle design that I started working on based on someone else's design that was called the Hyperion, and this is what it looks like as of right this second, I believe. Oh, those are mounted slightly offset. That's not intentional, but that's just kind of because they're attached to the nodes. I thought about making this an SSTO, or at the very least, it can start as an SSTO. I might lower or improve its capabilities depending on exactly what I want to do. Right now, it's got two empty bays on either side, and then pretty much everything else is fuel except for the cockpit, and I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to go from here with it, but as you can see, it does have the Delta V to get to orbit already. In fact, I believe this is surface Delta V, and if I go to vacuum Delta V, you'll see it's actually a bit higher. So it goes from 4,060 to 4,336. Obviously, you're going to use a lot of that in the atmosphere before you get up there, especially because the thrust-to-weight ratio is only 1.47. Of course, that's only 1.47 when it starts. And I am going to give this thing some form of landing gear. I don't think it's not going to be flown like a plane, really, although there will be enough body lift produced to maintain a somewhat controllable descent or ascent using some aerodynamic effects, just not a lot of them. I'd also like to show you this. It was an attempt at a smaller, similar style tilt-rotor plane, inspired of course by the Osprey. This actually has doors that can extend backwards from the sides. There's nothing in there yet because I wanted to get the base design working first, but I do like the way I've managed to cook some pistons in here to make a little section that you could put some kerbals in, potentially kerbals and seats or a little bit of cargo or something. And all of the fuel is actually right in the engine wing bits because it is a very, very tiny craft. Out of the variations of it that I have, this is the latest one. I know it doesn't look much different. In fact, I believe it is. I believe there's some tweaks to this. I just can't remember exactly what, and unfortunately I cannot see it either. Although that elevon might be one of them. I'm not quite sure. It does try to serve to make this wing transition look a little bit more natural. And finally, I'm going to look at the origin of this plane design here. This is the PX2. It's not fully named yet. As you can see, it's only 2 engines on this variation, which is not enough. You can also see there are 4 passenger cabins, which is too many. Which means that the next major variation added a 3rd engine on the top here and removed one of the passenger cabins. There's also these little winglet bits at the front to help improve the look of the design but keep the center of lift farther forward. This is still not quite right. Now this variation does work better. There are slight tweaks, mostly in the angle of these engines, the angle of the tailplane, and the exact positioning of other features. I believe the front little winglet things were removed as well. And there is an additional flap here at the back, which for some reason didn't save with the authorities turned off, deployed, and at a 0 authority limiter, but this is a trim tab, so you customize the trim setting by changing the authority limiter in flight. I have this on every design that's based on this core variant, using that feature. I also, on this version, have the rear nacelle having the highest flow priority, this nacelle having a little bit less flow priority, and so on and so forth going to the front of the plane, with the wings draining last. Unfortunately, that design actually forces the craft to go into an unstable configuration during flight, so I do have one final variant on this. Now, of course, it looks the same, but those design problems have been corrected, except apparently not this one, because I'm having to fix that right now. But this does have one additional feature, which is a KOS little computer in there. In fact, it's the oldest KOS computer, and this is because I was using this particular design right now to try to write an autopilot program. That is not done yet, but it is getting close. Once I have that autopilot script working, I shall be finally coming up with a name for these various craft and releasing them. This version, the cargo variant, the refueling variant, and so on. I believe that's it. There's just 3 variants at this time: cargo, passengers, and refueling. Might want to make another kind at some point. I don't know. And if you wanted to see just how far that plane can be flown, you can see here. I am not on the North Pole. In fact, I am not anywhere close to it. I am barely on the ice shelf in the northern part of Kerbin. However, this was while testing AI systems. I started at the KSC down here, flew east. Yes, east. I was about to say west. That is completely wrong. I flew west all the way to about... I did fly by this CX2R, 2.4R, the cargo variant of this that I had previously manually flown out to here. I flew it out to around here, went up a bit, doubled back a little bit, did some other things, nearly crashed it a couple of times as I was struggling to learn how to use things in KOS, and then flew north all the way up here. So it's basically gone halfway around Kerbin, along with doing some maneuvering, and you can see it's still got about a fourth of its fuel left. Now, I believe the theoretical range on this from my basic calculations is about 80% of Kerbin's circumnavigation, so it can't quite go all the way around the world, but I imagine once I get my autopilot script functional and optimized, it will be able to go around the world. Or, with the addition of drop tanks, it will be able to go around the world. But anyhow, thank you for watching, and as always, see you on a plain white screen with nothing distinguishable